I looked at the emergency radio for less than 5 seconds before it came alive. Not with a loud alarm, not with a voice asking for help, just one sharp burst of static. It sounded like someone taking a slow breath. My trainer had laughed earlier that evening and said, "Don't worry, these old radios make strange noises when the weather changes." At the time, I believed him. I wish I still did. That was my first night working alone at Lock 14, and before sunrise, I would hear something no emergency manual could explain. I had wanted this job for almost a year. After leaving my warehouse job, I needed something quieter. My uncle had worked on the river for nearly 30 years. He always said the river paid well if you respected it. It has its own rules, he used to tell me. Break them and the river remembers. I always thought that was just an old man's way of making a boring job sound important. Looking back, maybe he wasn't joking. Lock 14 sat far away from the nearest town. The road leading there twisted through thick woods before ending beside the river. During the day, it looked peaceful. Barges passed through. Birds floated over the water. Everything felt ordinary. At night, it became another place entirely. The silence was almost heavy. Even the wind seemed careful. When my evening shift started, the sun was already disappearing behind the trees. Long shadows stretched across the concrete walls of the locked chamber. The control building was small but solid. Inside were old metal desks, faded maps, weather monitors, security screens, and shelves packed with binders that looked older than I was. Some of the emergency posters hanging on the walls were yellow with age. One caught my eye. If unscheduled radio contact is received after midnight, verify visual before responding. I frowned. That seemed oddly specific. Another notice below it had been partly torn away. Do not gate until. The missing words bothered me more than they should have. I asked my trainer about them before he left. He barely looked. They've been there forever, he said while grabbing his jacket. Nobody bothers taking them down. What do they mean? He smiled without answering. You'll be fine. Then he walked out the door. His truck disappeared down the dark road. A few moments later, I realized something. I was completely alone. The river made soft sounds outside. Water pushed gently against steel. Somewhere across the trees, an owl called once. Then everything became quiet again. I started my rounds. Every hour I checked water levels, inspected the gates, watched camera feeds, and logged every passing vessel. Nothing unusual. At least not at first. Around 11, a long cargo barge requested permission to enter. Everything worked perfectly. The gates opened. The water level changed. The captain thanked me over the radio before continuing downstream. His voice slowly faded into static. I remember thinking how peaceful the night had become. Sometimes the worst moments begin with peace. Just after midnight, thick fog started rising from the river. It wasn't in the forecast. 1 minute I could see the far bank. The next it vanished behind white mist. The security cameras became almost useless. Every screen showed nothing but gray. I checked the weather station. No warnings. No storms. Nothing. Outside, the air suddenly felt colder. Cold enough that I could see my own breath. That didn't make sense. It wasn't winter. As I stood near the control window, I heard it. A bell. One slow ring. Then another. Deeper. Heavy. Metal against metal. I froze. River buoys sometimes had bells attached to them. But there weren't any near Lock 14. The sound came again. Closer this time. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The beam barely cut through the fog. Concrete walls disappeared only a few yards ahead. The river itself was almost invisible. Only the sound of moving water told me it was still there. Then I noticed something strange. The lock gates were closed, exactly as they should have been. But water inside the chamber was moving. Not flowing, circling, slowly, like something enormous had turned beneath the surface. I waited. The water settled. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe the current had shifted. That explanation lasted about 10 seconds. Because the emergency radio clipped to my belt crackled. Static, then silence, then one sentence. Lock 14. The voice was weak, almost whispering, requesting entry. I grabbed the radio. This is Lock 14. Identify yourself. Nothing. Only static. I checked the vessel schedule. No arrivals. No departures. No boats within 20 miles. The radar screen confirmed it. Empty river. Still, I couldn't ignore protocol. I switched to the exterior cameras again. Fog. Nothing but fog. I zoomed every camera. No lights. No engines. No movement. I answered once more. This is Lock 14. State your position. Silence. Then the signal disappeared. I stood there for nearly a minute. Finally, I wrote the incident into the logbook. 0017 unknown radio transmission. Unable to verify source. As soon as I finished writing, I noticed something odd. The page underneath already had writing on it. I hadn't turned the page. Slowly, I lifted the corner. It was yesterday's log. Near the bottom, someone had written in messy handwriting. Don't answer unless you can see them. No signature. No explanation. Just that sentence. I stared at it for a long time. Maybe someone had written it as a joke. Workers in lonely places played jokes on new employees all the time. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. Around 1 in the morning, the fog finally began thinning. The cameras slowly cleared. The river looked empty again. I felt embarrassed. Maybe I had let the darkness get into my head. I even laughed quietly. Then camera 3 flickered. Just once. I leaned closer. For less than a second, I saw what looked like a small workboat drifting beside the outer gate. No lights. No engine wake. Just a black shape. Then it was gone. The screen returned to an empty river. I replayed the recording. Nothing. Only fog. No boat. No shadow. Nothing at all. I rubbed my eyes. Lack of sleep. That had to be it. Around 2, I made another inspection outside. The fog had almost disappeared. Moonlight reflected off the calm water. Everything looked normal again, until I reached the lower maintenance walkway. There on the damp concrete was a trail of wet footprints. Bare feet. Large. They began near the edge of the river. Walked several yards. Then simply stopped. Not turned around. Not faded away. Stopped, as if whoever made them had vanished into the air. I stood there with my flashlight shaking in my hand. There were no footprints leading back. Only one trail, coming out of the river, ending in the middle of the walkway. I slowly backed away. For the first time that night, I locked the control room door behind me. The emergency radio stayed silent until dawn. When the morning operator arrived, I told him everything. The strange transmission, the footprints, the camera, the old warning. He listened without interrupting. Then he quietly asked one question. "You answered the radio, didn't you?" I nodded. He looked toward the river through the window. His face lost all color. After several long seconds, he sighed. "I was hoping you wouldn't." Before I could ask what he meant, he reached over and tore the page with my log entry from the book. He folded it once, slipped it into his pocket, and said something I still think about every time I hear a radio crackle. "Tonight, if they call again." He paused. "You don't let them inside." I almost convinced myself the morning operator had been trying to scare me. After my first shift ended, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those wet footprints stopping in the middle of the walkway. I kept hearing his last words. "Don't let them inside." Inside where? The lock, the control room, or something else. By the time the sun went down, I was back at Lock 14. The place looked normal again. Barges moved through the channel. Gulls circled above the river. Workers from the day shift joked while loading their trucks. Nobody acted like anything strange had happened. That made me wonder if I had imagined it all. The morning operator wasn't there when I arrived. Another man handed me the logbook without saying much. I flipped through the pages. The entry I had written about the unknown radio call was gone. Not crossed out. Not corrected. Gone. The page had been neatly cut from the book. I looked at the new operator. Did someone remove yesterday's report? He didn't even look up from his coffee. If it isn't there, don't worry about it. That answer sat in my stomach like a stone. I started my shift anyway. The first few hours were almost boring. A maintenance tug passed through around 8. Then a fishing boat requested permission to enter from downstream. Everything worked exactly the way it should. The gates opened. The water rose. The captain waved as he passed. For a while, I felt embarrassed about the fear I had carried back with me. Maybe lonely places just played tricks on tired people. By 10 o'clock, clouds covered the moon. The river turned black. The trees along both banks became dark shapes that barely stood out against the sky. I switched on the floodlights surrounding the lock. White beams spilled across the water. The concrete walls glowed. Nothing moved. At exactly 10:43, the emergency radio screamed to life. Not static. Not interference. A real voice. "L Lock 14. The transmission broke apart. Mayday, mayday." I grabbed the microphone before I even realized I was moving. "This is Lock 14, go ahead." Heavy breathing filled the speaker. Then a man spoke again. "We've lost steering, current's too strong." His words cracked with panic. "We're carrying steel containers. We're going to hit the gates." I turned toward the radar. Nothing. Not one target. No vessels. No movement. The screen was completely clean. My heartbeat sped up. "This is Lock 14, I repeated. "Identify your vessel." There was a pause. Then, "Cargo vessel, Ashkum." His voice faded beneath loud scraping sounds. Metal grinding against metal. Someone yelled in the background. Another alarm started ringing. "We can't stop." The transmission cut out. For a second, the room became perfectly silent. Training took over. I activated emergency procedures. Floodlights increased to full brightness. Navigation signals changed. I checked every camera. North approach. Empty. South approach. Empty. Gate cameras. Empty. Upper channel. Empty. Lower channel. Nothing. Not even a ripple. I rushed outside. Cold air hit my face. The river stretched in both directions. Still, dark, quiet, no running engines, no navigation lights, no horn, nothing. Yet the radio came alive again. They're too close. A different voice. A woman. She sounded terrified. Please open the lock. I looked directly at the water. If a cargo ship was really that close, I should have seen it. Heard it. Felt the vibration through the concrete. Instead, only silence. Then I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The water near the outer gates had started moving. Not because of a boat. The surface was circling again. Slow, wide, like something deep below had begun to turn. The emergency lights reflected across the spinning water. I backed away. The radio crackled. We can see your lights. I froze. The voice continued. Why can't you see us? I slowly turned toward the control building. Every window reflected the floodlights. Nobody stood inside. Nobody stood behind me. The radio hissed again. Then, we're almost there. My throat tightened. Without thinking, I ran back inside. I checked every camera again. Still nothing. The radar remained blank. I enlarged every screen. Nothing. No cargo ship. No tugboat. No drifting barge. Only black water. Then camera 5 flickered. Just for half a second. A massive shape appeared inside the fog. It looked enormous. Rows of containers stacked high. A rust-covered bow pushing through white mist. Then the image disappeared. The recording rewound automatically. I watched it again. Nothing. The ship wasn't there anymore. Only empty water. I saved the footage anyway. When I opened the file, it contained only static. No image at all. I stared at the monitor. Something behind me clicked. One of the old emergency binders had fallen from the shelf by itself. I walked over and picked it up. Its cover was faded almost white. Emergency incidents. Most pages were damaged by water. Near the middle, one report caught my eye. Cargo vessel Ashkum. My hand stopped moving. The same name. I read faster. The report said the Ashkum had vanished almost 40 years earlier, while approaching Lock 14 during heavy fog. No wreckage had ever been found. No survivors. No distress recording had been recovered. Official cause. Unknown. I felt cold all over. The radio whispered again. Not loudly. Almost gently. You found us. Every light inside the control room blinked once. The building fell into darkness. Only for 2 seconds. When the power returned, every security camera showed the same picture. The bow of a giant cargo ship. So close that it completely filled every screen. Rust streaked down its steel hull. Water poured from broken railings. Its name, ASHCOMB. I spun toward the window. Outside, the river was empty. I looked back at the monitors. The ship was gone. Every screen showed calm water again. The emergency phone began ringing. Not the radio. The direct emergency line. Almost nobody used that number. I answered with shaking hands. Static filled the speaker. Then the same frightened captain spoke. His voice sounded weaker now. We never made it through. A long silence followed. Then one final sentence. They opened the gates anyway. The line went dead. I stood there until sunrise, without touching another control. When the day shift finally arrived, I showed them the incident log. Every word I had written during the night had disappeared. The pages were blank, except for one sentence written in faded blue ink. I knew I hadn't written it. It simply said, "Next time they'll ask you to look outside." The recording had my voice on it. That should have been impossible. I hadn't even pressed play yet. My hand froze over the old cassette player while I stared at the faded label. Archive 14B Emergency Traffic. Do not erase. The tape was older than I was. Dust covered its plastic case. Someone had written the date in black marker, but time had faded most of the numbers away. I looked around the records room. The room sat beneath the control office, hidden behind a steel door that most workers never used. I only found it because I wanted answers. After the strange calls from the night before, I couldn't keep pretending everything was normal. The shelves stretched from floor to ceiling. Boxes, binders, maps, hundreds of old tapes. Every year the lock had been open, seemed to be stored down there. I slipped the cassette into the player. For a few seconds, all I heard was static. Then an operator spoke. "Lock 14, midnight shift beginning." His voice sounded tired. I checked the label again. The tape was more than 30 years old. The recording continued with normal radio traffic. Weather reports, routine barge requests, water level checks. Nothing unusual. I almost turned it off. Then another voice broke through the static. "Weak. Panicked. We're approaching. Please answer." My stomach tightened. It was the same frightened captain I had heard the night before. The same broken signal. The same fear. The operator on the recording answered calmly. "State your position." Silence followed. Then the captain whispered something that made my skin crawl. "If you can't see us, don't open the gates." The tape clicked. The recording ended. I sat there without moving. The incident I thought had happened to me wasn't new. It had happened before. How many times? That question stayed with me as I searched through more boxes. One binder listed unusual radio events dating back almost 50 years. Most entries were short. Signal received, no vessel located. Distress call heard, search negative. Operator transferred. The last note appeared again and again. Not fired. Not retired. Transferred. But there was never a destination. I noticed something else. Every few years, another operator disappeared from the records completely. Their names stopped. Their reports ended, as if they had never worked there. The silence in the records room suddenly felt heavy. I wasn't alone anymore. At least that was the feeling. I looked behind me. Empty shelves, concrete walls, one weak light hanging from the ceiling. Nothing else. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had just stepped out of sight. I climbed back upstairs. Rain had started falling outside. Tiny drops tapped against the control room windows. The river looked darker than usual. At exactly 11:43, the emergency phone rang once. Only once. When I answered, no one spoke. I waited. Nothing. Then I heard breathing. Slow. Patient. Not frightened. Just waiting. The line disconnected. I checked the caller log. No incoming number. No recorded call. Even the phone insisted it had never rung. I laughed quietly. Not because anything was funny. Because I could feel myself trying to stay calm. Around midnight, I returned to the archive room. Something told me there was more. The last shelf held several unmarked tapes. One had no date, only a single word. Future. I almost smiled. Someone had to be playing a joke. Still, I picked it up. The cassette looked newer than the others. Not old, not damaged, almost clean. I pushed it into the player. Static. Then, my own voice. This is Lock 14. I jerked away from the machine. Every hair on my arm stood up. The recording continued. I have visual on the north approach. I had never said those words. Not once. Outside, the north approach was empty. Always empty. The tape continued. I repeat, I have visual. Another voice answered me. Do not make eye contact. I couldn't breathe. Who was recording this? When? My voice spoke again. They're waving. The tape filled with heavy static. Then, they know I can hear them. I pressed stop. The room became silent. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped the cassette. Someone knocked upstairs. 3 slow knocks. I hurried back into the control room. Nobody stood outside the door. The parking lot was empty. Rain still fell across the concrete. Then I noticed fresh water on the floor. Small puddles, leading away from the entrance. Bare footprints, the same large footprints from my first night. Except this time, they were inside. I followed them carefully. They crossed the room, past every desk, stopped beside the emergency radio. Nothing else. The floor beyond it was dry. The tracks simply ended. The radio remained silent for almost a minute. Then it clicked. A calm voice spoke. We've arrived. Not frightened. Not desperate. Calm. I answered before thinking. Who's arrived? No reply. Only static. Then another voice joined in. A woman's voice. Soft enough that I almost missed it. He answered again. The signal died. Outside, thick fog rolled across the river much earlier than it should have. Within minutes, the floodlights could barely reach the water. Every camera slowly turned white. I checked the radar. Blank, exactly like the night before. Then one tiny dot appeared. Just one. No identification. No speed. No heading. It simply sat beyond the outer gates. I zoomed in. The dot disappeared. 1 second later, every alarm inside the building sounded together. Gate sensors, water pressure warnings, communication errors, power fluctuations. Every system claimed something different was happening. But through the window, the river remained perfectly still. The alarm stopped as suddenly as they had started. A printer beside my desk came to life. No one had touched it. A single page slid out. I picked it up. It wasn't today's report. It was tomorrow's. The date at the top hadn't happened yet. Below it was one sentence. Emergency recording created, 01:18 a.m. The current time was only 12:41. There shouldn't have been any recording. Not yet. The paper continued. Operator confirmed visual contact. I swallowed hard. I hadn't seen anything. Not yet. At the bottom of the page were 6 words. Words I recognized immediately, because I had heard them only minutes earlier. Do not make eye contact. I slowly looked toward the fog outside. For the first time since taking this job, I wasn't wondering whether something was out there. I was wondering whether it was already looking back. And somewhere inside the archive below my feet, a cassette recorder clicked on by itself. The first time I heard the signal, I thought someone was testing the radio. It came through so quietly that I almost missed it. A thin crackle, a burst of static, then one sentence. "Please, somebody answer." I looked at the clock. 11:58 p.m. The same time, the strange calls had started during my previous shifts. My hand rested on the microphone, but I didn't pick it up. Not yet. The words from the old warning poster echoed in my mind. Verify visual before responding. I turned toward the river. The floodlights painted long white paths across the black water. The current moved slowly between the concrete walls of Lock 14. Everything looked peaceful. Too peaceful. The radar screen beside me was empty. Every security camera showed the same thing. No boats. No lights. No movement. The radio crackled again. "Lock 14, do you copy?" The voice sounded weak, tired, like someone who had been talking for hours. I swallowed hard. "This is Lock 14, I answered. "Identify yourself." For a few seconds, there was only static. Then the voice returned. "We're still upstream." Still, that single word bothered me more than anything else. "What's your position?" I asked. "Mile marker 21. I quickly unfolded the river map on my desk. Mile marker 21 sat almost 6 miles north of the lock. If a vessel was really there, I should have seen it on radar. Nothing appeared, not even the smallest fishing boat. The transmission ended without another word. I logged the call and kept working. Around midnight, a fuel barge passed through without any problems. Its captain joked over the radio. "Quiet night." I forced a smile. You could say that. The barge disappeared downstream. Its engine noise faded into the darkness. For nearly 20 minutes, everything felt normal again. I almost convinced myself the strange signal had been simple interference. Then Channel 16 came alive again. "Please answer." The same voice. The same tired breathing. The same location. Mile marker 21. I frowned. "You haven't moved." A pause. "We can't." My fingers tightened around the microphone. "What happened?" No answer. Only the sound of water. Not rushing water. Gentle waves against metal. As if a boat was drifting without power. "I need your vessel name." The reply came so softly that I almost missed it. "We don't remember." The signal vanished. A chill spread across my shoulders. Every emergency call followed certain rules. Captains knew their vessel's name. They knew their position. They answered questions. Nothing about this call felt real. I called river traffic control downstream. "Can you confirm any vessels near mile marker 21? The dispatcher checked for almost a minute. Finally, she answered. "Negative. No reports. Nothing." "What about distress calls?" Another pause. "We didn't receive any." I thanked her and ended the call. The room suddenly felt much smaller. Outside, a cold wind swept across the river. The trees along the banks bent gently. Clouds drifted over the moon. The floodlights looked dimmer now, even though nothing had changed. At 12:47, the emergency signal returned. This time, another voice joined in. A woman. She sounded exhausted. "We've been waiting." "Waiting for what?" "Who else is with you?" I asked. Silence. Then, "They already crossed." My stomach tightened. "Who crossed?" No answer. The radio clicked off. I checked every camera again. Still nothing. I zoomed toward the upstream bend, where the river disappeared into darkness. For just one frame, I thought I saw a navigation light. One tiny white light. It blinked once, then disappeared. I replayed the footage. Nothing, only empty water. The printer beside my desk suddenly started running. Paper slowly slid into the track. No one had sent anything. I picked it up. It was an old navigation chart. Across mile marker 21, someone had circled the location with red ink. Below it were 4 handwritten words. Never answer after midnight. I searched every file on my computer. Nothing about the chart existed in the digital records. Someone had placed it into the printer years ago. Or minutes ago. I couldn't tell which idea frightened me more. Just after 1 o'clock, thick fog began rolling over the river. It arrived silently. One moment, I could see the opposite bank. The next, everything beyond the floodlights disappeared into white. The cameras became nearly useless. The radar remained empty. Then the emergency signal came back. Louder this time. "We see your lights." I slowly looked out the window. There was nothing beyond the fog. No shadows. No shapes. Only white mist. "You should see ours," the voice continued. I searched the darkness. Nothing. "We're almost there." My heartbeat quickened. If they were really approaching, the radar would show something. It stayed blank. Every alarm inside the control room remained silent. The river itself made no unusual sound. Yet the voice felt closer, almost as if whoever was speaking stood just outside. Then I heard something new. Not through the radio. Outside. A ship's horn. Long. Low. Distant. It echoed across the water. I rushed outside with my flashlight. Cold air hit my face. The fog swallowed the beam within a few feet. I listened carefully. Nothing. No engine. No waves against a hull. No horn. Only the steady current slipping through the lock. When I stepped onto the maintenance walkway, I noticed fresh water dripping from the railing. Tiny drops, as if someone with soaking wet hands had just leaned there. I touched the metal. Ice cold. The dripping stopped. A strange smell hung in the air. Old river mud. Rust. Something else I couldn't place. I hurried back inside. The radio waited until the door closed behind me. Then it whispered one sentence. "Don't let us drift away again." Again. That word stayed with me. Again meant this had happened before. I searched the archive database for mile marker 21. Several old reports appeared. Most were ordinary. One file caught my eye. It was dated almost 40 years earlier. Unidentified distress signal received nightly from upstream. Search operations negative. Source never located. 40 years. The same location. The same mystery. The same unanswered calls. A photograph had been scanned into the report. It showed 3 river rescue workers standing beside a patrol boat. Someone had written their names underneath. 2 names had been crossed out. The third matched the surname of the morning operator who had warned me on my first day. Before I could read the rest, every light inside the control room flickered. The radio hissed. The tired voice returned one last time. Only now. It no longer sounded far away. It sounded like it was speaking from the hallway outside my office. We finally found the lock. I stared at the closed door. No footsteps. No shadows beneath it. No sound except my own breathing. Then the handle moved, just enough to tell me someone or something was trying to come inside. By the third night, nobody laughed when the emergency signal came through. Not even the rescue crew. The radio cracked with the same weak voice. "Please, we're still at mile marker 21. It sounded exhausted now, like whoever was speaking had given up expecting anyone to arrive. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at the radar. Nothing. The cameras. Nothing. The river outside my window was flat and black beneath the floodlights. No running lights. No engine noise. No boat. Just moving water. I picked up the microphone anyway. "This is Lock 14. Rescue teams are on the way." The voice stayed silent for several seconds. Then it whispered something that made my stomach tighten. They always are. The transmission ended. I immediately called River Rescue. This time they took the report seriously. The captain of the rescue unit had heard about the strange calls from the other operators. Within 20 minutes, 2 rescue boats were moving upstream. I watched their progress on the tracking system. At least I watched until they reached mile marker 21. Then both signals froze. Not disappeared. Just stopped moving. The captain called over the radio. "We're at the location." "What do you see?" I asked. "Nothing." He sounded confused. "Check again," I said. "Already did." The rescue boat's engine hummed through the speaker. "We've searched both banks." He paused. "No vessel." I looked back toward the river map. There has to be something. Another crew member came onto the radio. "We found a strange current." "What kind of current?" There was a long silence. Finally she answered. "The water is moving in circles." That made my heart sink. I had seen the same thing beside the lock. The captain continued. "It isn't natural." I listened carefully. Behind his voice, I heard rushing water. Not from the river. Something deeper, like a waterfall far below the surface. The sound lasted only a few seconds. Then it vanished. The captain spoke again. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" "The water." Before I could answer, loud static filled the radio. The signal became impossible to understand. Then it cleared. The captain's breathing sounded faster now. "Something just hit the hull." "What hit you?" "I don't know." Metal groaned loudly. The crew began shouting. Another voice yelled. "There's nothing there." The transmission broke apart. I stood frozen inside the control room. Every instinct told me to send another rescue team. But how could I? There was nothing to rescue. No boat. No distress beacon. Only voices. 5 long minutes passed. Then the captain called again. His voice sounded calm. Too calm. False alarm. What happened? "We probably struck driftwood." His answer came too quickly. "You sounded frightened." I was mistaken. Something felt wrong. The captain wasn't the same man I had spoken to earlier. His tone had changed. His breathing had changed. Even his choice of words felt different. I asked him one last question. "Did you find the current?" Another pause. "What current?" Goosebumps spread across my arms. "You just reported it." "No, I didn't." The line went silent. The rescue boats returned an hour later. I met them at the dock. The crews climbed onto the pier without saying much. They looked exhausted. One man avoided looking at the river completely. I walked over to the captain. Did you really lose radio contact? He frowned. When? Near mile marker 21. He shook his head. We never lost contact. You reported something hitting the hull. Again, he shook his head. No, the strange current. He stared at me. What strange current? For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined the whole conversation. Then another crew member quietly interrupted us. It wasn't driftwood. The captain immediately looked at him. The younger man hesitated. Then he lowered his voice. The water down there. He swallowed. It moved against the wind. The captain stepped between us. That's enough. The conversation ended there. Before leaving, the younger crew member slipped a folded piece of paper into my hand. He didn't say a word. Back inside the control room, I opened it. It contained only a rough sketch. A circle. Inside the circle, another smaller circle. Beneath the drawing were 5 handwritten words. Don't anchor above the current. No signature. Nothing else. Around midnight, the emergency signal returned. This time, the voice sounded stronger. You almost found us. I looked toward the dark river. What are you? No reply. Instead, another voice answered. A child. Is the rescue boat gone? My throat tightened. There shouldn't have been a child. Not on a cargo vessel. Not in the middle of the river. I reached for the microphone again. How many people are with you? Silence. Then, we don't remember anymore. The transmission faded into static. Rain started falling just after 1. Heavy drops hammered the roof of the control building. Visibility dropped even farther. The cameras struggled to see beyond the lock gates. Suddenly, every fish detector beneath the lock activated at once. The monitor lit up with dozens of moving shapes. Far too many. Too large. They gathered beneath the upstream gates. I leaned closer. The readings lasted only 3 seconds. Then every shape disappeared together, as if they had all turned away. Outside, the river looked calm again. Not a single ripple disturbed the surface. I stepped onto the observation platform. Cold rain soaked my jacket. The beam from my flashlight swept across the water. Nothing. Then, about 50 yards upstream, the current began spinning. A slow circle, exactly where the rescue crews had searched. Branches floating on the surface drifted toward it. But instead of being pulled under, they stopped. They simply floated around the edge, never crossing into the center. The circle grew wider. The water remained perfectly silent. No whirlpool. No splashing. Just smooth water moving in a perfect ring. I couldn't look away. Something about it felt almost hypnotic. My radio suddenly crackled. The rescue captain shouted, "Step back from the water." I nearly dropped the radio. "How do you know where I am?" His breathing came fast. "We're watching you." I spun around. The dock behind me was empty. No rescue boat. No vehicles. Nobody. "Where are you?" No answer. Only static. Then the same tired voice from the distress call whispered over the captain's fading transmission. "He can't see us either." The current stopped instantly. The river became still. I hurried back inside and locked every door. The rain continued until dawn. When daylight finally reached the river, I drove to mile marker 21 myself. The water looked completely ordinary. No strange current. No damaged trees. No floating debris. Nothing. One of the rescue workers met me there. It was the younger man who had handed me the drawing. He looked pale. Without saying a word, he pointed toward a large rock near the shoreline. Someone had carved a message into its surface decades earlier. The letters were worn by time, but they were still readable. The river doesn't keep the boats. It keeps the calls. The worker looked at me with tired eyes. Then he quietly asked the question I had been afraid to ask myself. If there was never a boat? He glanced toward the slow-moving river. Then who keeps asking us to rescue them? The voice said my name before I ever touched the radio. I wasn't even looking at it. I was standing beside the control room window, watching rain drift across the river. The floodlights barely reached the far bank. Everything beyond them had disappeared into darkness. Then the speaker crackled. Not loudly, just enough to pull my eyes toward it. Ethan. I stopped breathing. Nobody working at the lock called me Ethan. Everyone used my last name. Even the day shift supervisor barely remembered my first name. I stared at the radio. It remained silent for a few seconds, long enough for me to convince myself I had imagined it. Then it spoke again. Ethan, you're standing by the east window. Every muscle in my body tightened. Slowly, I turned around. The control room was empty. The door was locked. The hallway lights outside were off. No footsteps. No voices. Only the soft hum of old electrical equipment. I picked up the microphone. This is Lock 14. My voice sounded smaller than I expected. Who is this? Static answered first. Then the same tired voice returned. You already know. I don't. Another pause. You will. The transmission ended. I walked through the entire building. Every office. Every storage room. The archive downstairs. The maintenance hallway. Nothing. No sign that anyone had entered. When I returned to the control room, my coffee mug had moved. I knew exactly where I had left it. Beside the logbook. Now it sat near the emergency radio. Only a few inches away. Not enough for someone else to notice. Enough for me to notice. I told myself I must have moved it without thinking. That explanation lasted until I looked at the logbook. A new line had been written beneath my last report. Not in my handwriting. You keep checking the windows. Stop doing that. My heartbeat began pounding in my ears. I flipped through the security recordings. No one had entered the room. No one had touched the book. The cameras showed only me. Writing. Walking. Looking outside. Exactly as the note described. At 12:11 a.m., the emergency signal returned. Ethan. This time I answered immediately. What do you want? The voice ignored my question. You haven't fixed the broken clock. I looked toward the old wall clock. It had stopped at 2, 17 years ago. Nobody bothered repairing it. How do you know about that? No reply. Instead, you should close the top drawer. I turned toward my desk. The top drawer was open about an inch. I hadn't noticed. A cold feeling spread through my chest. I pushed it shut. The radio whispered again. Better. I didn't answer. For the first time since taking this job, I unplugged the radio. The speaker went silent. I took one slow breath. Then another. Maybe that was enough. Maybe. My desk phone rang. I picked it up. No one spoke. Only breathing. Slow. Steady. Then the same voice. I liked the radio better. The line went dead. I unplugged the phone too. The room became quiet again. For nearly 15 minutes, nothing happened. I almost laughed at myself. Maybe stress was doing this. Maybe, too, many sleepless nights were making every sound feel important. Outside, the rain stopped. Clouds drifted away from the moon. Silver light spread across the river. For a brief moment, the lock looked beautiful. Calm, still, safe. Then every security monitor blinked at once. Each screen switched to the same camera. Camera 3. The upstream approach. The image showed empty water. Nothing else, until a single frame flashed across every monitor. Someone standing on the riverbank, too far away to see clearly. Gone before I could focus. I replayed the recording. Empty river. Again. Empty. The figure appeared only once. Exactly one frame. I leaned closer to the monitor. The radio, still unplugged, crackled behind me. I turned so quickly that the chair tipped over. The power cable still hung loose beside the desk. No electricity reached the unit. Yet the speaker came alive. Don't zoom in. I stared at it. The voice sounded closer now. Almost gentle. You won't like what you see. I slowly looked back at the monitor. Without touching the controls, the camera began zooming by itself. The shoreline grew larger. Trees, mud, broken branches. Then, footprints, bare footprints leading into the river. Not away from it, into it. The image froze. The radio whispered again. Those are yours. I shook my head. No, they will be. The signal vanished. For several seconds, I couldn't move. Finally, I forced myself outside. The night air felt colder than it should have. Mist drifted across the water. The floodlights buzzed softly above me. Everything looked exactly like the camera image. Except, there were no footprints. The shoreline was untouched. I walked to the maintenance platform. The river flowed quietly beneath me. The strange circular current was gone. I almost felt relieved. Then I noticed something in the reflection. Not on the riverbank. Not in the water. In the glass of the control room, window behind me. A person standing inside. Watching me. I spun around. The room was empty. When I looked back at the reflection, it was gone. My radio clipped to my belt vibrated. I hadn't brought the unplugged emergency unit outside. This was my portable radio. Its battery had died 2 nights earlier. The display was black. Yet a voice came through the speaker. Don't go back inside yet. I whispered before I could stop myself. Why? You'll interrupt him. My mouth went dry. Interrupt who? No answer. Only static. Then another sound. A chair scraping across the control room floor. I looked toward the window. From where I stood, I could see my desk. The chair slowly rolled backward. Nobody touched it. The logbook opened by itself. 1 page turned. Then another. Then another. As if invisible hands were searching for something. I ran to the door and unlocked it. The room stood exactly as I had left it. Except for the logbook. It was open to a page I had never seen. Every line contained the name of a different lock operator. Beside each name was a date. Some stretched back more than 60 years. At the bottom of the page was one empty line. Waiting. As I stared at it, fresh ink slowly appeared. Letter by letter. My first name. Then my last. The date beside it wasn't today's date. It was tomorrow's. Before I could touch the page, the emergency radio came to life one last time. The voice no longer sounded frightened. It sounded almost relieved. Now you know why nobody remembers the operators who leave. The room fell silent. Outside, the river continued flowing through the darkness as if nothing had happened. But I couldn't stop looking at that final line in the logbook. Because underneath my name, one sentence had appeared in handwriting I recognized as my own. Tomorrow night, don't answer when I call you. I knew I was making a mistake the moment I untied the patrol boat. The radio hadn't stopped calling my name for 3 nights. Every transmission came from the same place. Mile marker 21. Every search found nothing. No wreck. No survivors. No drifting cargo. Only that strange current that refused to behave like any river I had ever seen. I should have stayed inside the control room. Instead, just before midnight, I started the engine and pointed the boat upstream. The lock disappeared behind me. Its floodlights grew smaller with every minute. Soon they were nothing more than pale stars floating above the black water. The river felt different away from the lock. The current became slower. The banks narrowed. Tall trees leaned over the water until their branches almost touched above my head. The air grew colder. Not the kind of cold that comes before rain. This felt older, heavier, as if the river itself was breathing against my face. The radio hissed. "Ethan." I didn't answer. "You finally came." My hands tightened around the wheel. "I'm only checking the channel." The voice almost laughed. "No." A long pause followed. "You came looking for us." I shut the radio off. The silence lasted less than a minute. Then the speaker crackled again, even though the power light stayed dark. "You can't turn this one off." I stopped looking at the radio. Instead, I watched the shoreline. Every few hundred yards stood old navigation posts. Most were crooked. Some had fallen into the river years ago. Then I noticed something strange. The mile markers had stopped making sense. Marker 19. Then 20. The next one should have been 21. Instead, it read 23. I slowed the boat. Maybe 21 had washed away. A few minutes later, another post appeared. It read 21, but it stood behind 23. I frowned. That wasn't possible. River markers didn't move. I checked the navigation chart beside me. According to the map, I should already be passing a small island. There was no island, only open water. The compass spun slowly in circles. I tapped the glass. Nothing changed. The radio whispered again. "The maps don't work here." Fog drifted across the river. It arrived so quietly that I didn't notice until the shoreline disappeared. The beam from my spotlight faded into white. The engine became the only sound left in the world. Then, the current vanished. Not slowed. Vanished. The boat no longer drifted downstream. It floated perfectly still. I looked over the side. The water beneath me wasn't moving. A river without a current. My stomach tightened. That couldn't happen. Not here. Not anywhere. The radio came alive again. "You crossed it." What did I cross? I asked before I could stop myself. "The fog line." The words settled deep inside me. Fog line. Not fog. A place. A boundary. I looked behind the boat. The river beyond the mist looked normal. Water flowed. Branches drifted downstream. Ahead of me, nothing moved. The surface looked smooth as black glass. I almost turned around. Then I saw a light. Far ahead. Small. Yellow. Swinging gently. A lantern. I pushed the throttle forward. The boat moved silently now. Even the engine sounded different. Soft. Distant. Like I was hearing it through water. As I approached the lantern, another shape slowly appeared from the fog. A wooden dock. Old. Half collapsed. According to every chart I had studied, nothing should have been there. The dock stretched toward land. Beyond it stood several buildings. Dark. Weathered. Their roofs sagged beneath years of neglect. A faded sign leaned beside the shoreline. Most of the letters had rotted away. Only one word remained clear. Harbor. There had never been a harbor at mile marker 21. Not in any official record. I tied the boat to the dock. The wood creaked beneath my feet. It felt solid enough, but every board carried deep water stains, as if the river had swallowed this place many times before. The air smelled strange. Wet wood, rust, old smoke. Not a single bird called from the trees. Not even insects. The silence felt complete. I walked toward the nearest building. Its front door hung open. Inside stood dusty shelves covered with river charts. A cracked coffee mug rested beside an old radio. The calendar on the wall showed a year from decades ago. The page had never been turned. Everything looked abandoned. Yet, a kettle sitting on the stove felt warm. I pulled my hand back immediately. Someone should have been there. But nobody was. My flashlight swept across the room. Photographs covered one wall. River workers, rescue crews, boat captains, families smiling beside the water. One picture caught my attention. 4 lock operators stood in front of lock 14. I recognized one face. The morning operator who had warned me not to answer the radio. Except, he looked 20 years younger. Another face looked familiar too. It took several seconds before I realized why. The 4th man was me, or someone who looked exactly like me. Same face, same eyes, same uniform. Only the photograph had been taken decades before I was born. I stumbled backward. The frame slipped from my hands and shattered. The sound echoed through the empty building. Then, footsteps answered. Slow, measured, somewhere outside. I switched off my flashlight. The footsteps continued. Crunch, crunch, across wet gravel. They stopped just outside the doorway. I couldn't see anyone. Only thick white fog. The radio clipped to my belt crackled softly. Don't let him see your face. I held my breath. The footsteps started again. They moved past the doorway. Never entering. Never hurrying. Just walking. After several minutes, they faded into silence. I stayed where I was until I could finally breathe again. When I stepped back outside, something had changed. The dock was farther away. Much farther. It hadn't been more than 20 feet from the building. Now it looked almost 100 yards away. The ground between us hadn't been there before. An empty road stretched through the fog. Fresh tire tracks covered the mud. I followed them. The tracks ended at a large stone monument. Someone had carved a map into its surface. It wasn't a map of the river. It was a map of this hidden place. The harbor, the buildings, the strange still water. None of it existed on any modern chart. At the bottom of the carving, one sentence had been cut deeply into the stone. What enters during the fog is never recorded. My flashlight flickered. When it steadied again, the road had disappeared. Only the dock remained. Close again, exactly where I remembered it. I hurried back toward my boat. As I untied the rope, I noticed another vessel tied beside mine. An old rescue boat. Its paint had almost completely peeled away. The number on its hull matched the rescue unit that had searched this area years ago. Dust covered the seats. Spider webs stretched across the controls. It looked as though it had been sitting there for decades. Yet, its engine was warm. I climbed into my own boat and started the motor. The moment the engine came to life, the fog began moving. Not drifting, opening, like two curtains being pulled apart. The still water ahead flowed once more. The current returned beneath the hull. Behind me, the hidden harbor slowly disappeared into white. Within seconds, it was gone. When I reached Lock 14 just before dawn, I rushed inside and opened every river chart I could find. None of them showed the harbor. None mentioned the stone marker. None listed a dock beyond mile marker 21. It was as if the place had never existed. Then I emptied my jacket pocket. A small rusted key fell onto the desk. I didn't remember picking it up. A faded metal tag hung from the ring. 3 words had been stamped into it long ago. Harbor Office 1. I stared at the key until sunrise. If the harbor wasn't real, then why had I brought something back from it? The alarm shouldn't have gone off. I knew that before I even looked at the control panel. Emergency Gate 7 had been disconnected for almost 12 years. The power cables had been removed after newer flood controls were installed farther downstream. Every operator at Lock 14 knew it was nothing more than an old steel wall sitting in the dark. So when the warning light began flashing just after midnight, my first thought wasn't fear. It was that something had finally broken. I walked across the control room and stared at the old panel. The red light blinked every few seconds. Emergency Gate 7, manual override active. I frowned. Manual override. There wasn't anyone down there. The gate sat nearly a mile from the control building at the end of an abandoned service road. Nobody used it anymore, except maintenance crews a few times each year. I checked the electrical monitor. No power. Exactly what I expected. Every line feeding Gate 7 was dead. Then the warning horn sounded again. One long, low blast. The same sound I had heard during emergency drills. Only this wasn't a drill. I grabbed my flashlight and radio. Outside, the river looked almost peaceful. The moon reflected across the slow current, and a thin layer of mist floated over the surface. From the lock, the abandoned floodgate looked like nothing more than a dark shape in the distance. As I drove the old maintenance truck down the cracked service road, I kept telling myself there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe moisture had reached the control system. Maybe an old relay had failed. Machines did strange things when they got old. People did too. The truck headlights swept across broken fences and rusted signs warning people to stay away from the emergency spillway. Tall weeds had pushed through the pavement. Trees leaned over the road. It felt less like driving toward a piece of equipment and more like visiting a place everyone else had forgotten. When I reached the gate, I switched off the engine. The silence settled around me immediately. No insects, no birds, only the distant sound of moving water. I aimed my flashlight toward the giant steel gate. At first, everything looked normal. Then I noticed the gap. It wasn't much, maybe 6 inches, but it hadn't been there before. Emergency Gate 7 was standing open. Very slowly, very quietly, the heavy steel continued moving. Another inch, then another. I stared without blinking. The gate weighed hundreds of tons. Without electricity, it shouldn't have moved at all. I hurried toward the maintenance control box, mounted beside the concrete wall. Its metal door hung open. Inside, every breaker sat in the off position. Dust covered everything. Even spider webs stretched across the empty wiring. No power. No fresh footprints. Nothing. Yet behind me, the gate continued opening. A deep groaning sound echoed through the concrete. I turned around. The opening had grown wide enough for dark river water to push through. The current wasn't strong. It flowed almost gently, as if something on the other side had been waiting. I called the control room. No answer. Only static. I tried the emergency operations center. Nothing. My radio worked perfectly an hour earlier. Now every channel sounded empty. Then another voice came through. Not from dispatch. Not from another operator. "You're early." I froze. "Who's there?" The voice didn't answer my question. "It usually opens later." Static swallowed the transmission. I looked around with my flashlight. The spillway stretched into darkness. Concrete walls, rusted ladders, old maintenance platforms. Nobody. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing just beyond the edge of the light. I forced myself closer to the gate. Water slipped through the growing opening with almost no sound. That bothered me more than anything else. Fast-moving water should have been loud. This wasn't. It felt wrong. I crouched near the tracks beneath the gate. Fresh scrape marks shined across the rust. Something really had moved it. I reached out and touched the steel. It felt warm. Not hot. Just warm enough that it didn't match the cold night air. I pulled my hand back. The warmth faded almost immediately. Behind me, something splashed. I spun around. The flashlight beam swept across the water. Nothing. Then another splash. Farther downstream. I waited. Silence. The gate opened another few inches. I watched the gap carefully. For just a moment, I thought I saw another set of floodlights shining through from the opposite side. Not reflections. Real lights. As if another control station stood beyond the opening. I blinked. They disappeared. My radio crackled again. "You saw them." I whispered into the microphone. "What is this place?" The answer came slowly. It wasn't built to keep water out. The transmission ended. Cold spread across my back. I had spent weeks learning every part of Lock 14. No manual had ever mentioned another purpose for the floodgate. I climbed the narrow stairs leading to the old operating platform above the gate. The machinery was frozen with rust. Large gears hadn't turned in years. The emergency hand wheel remained locked with a heavy chain. A government inspection tag still hung from it. Last inspected 11 years earlier. Everything looked abandoned, except the chain securing the hand wheel swung gently back and forth. Someone had touched it recently. There was no wind. I stepped closer. The lock wasn't broken. It was unlocked. The padlock hung open. I knew it had been sealed during the last inspection. Someone had opened it, or something had. Below me, the gate shuttered again. The opening reached nearly 2 feet. The water beyond looked darker than the river in front of me, almost black. I leaned over the railing for a better look. The flashlight beam reached the surface, then simply vanished. It didn't reflect. It didn't scatter. The light was swallowed. A chill ran through me. I had never seen water behave like that. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, steady, coming from inside the maintenance tunnel beneath the platform. I aimed my flashlight toward the tunnel entrance. Nothing. The footsteps continued anyway. 1, 2, 3. Each one echoed through the concrete. They stopped just before reaching the light. I waited. Whoever had been walking never appeared. Instead, I heard breathing. Calm, patient, close enough that it sounded like someone standing only a few feet away. My flashlight flickered once. When the beam steadied again, fresh wet footprints crossed the concrete floor outside the tunnel. I hadn't seen them appear. They simply existed now, leading toward the opening gate, not away from it. I backed down the stairs without taking my eyes off them. The radio came alive one last time. You can still close it. Hope rushed through me. How? A pause. Then the voice answered. You'll have to go through first. The gate groaned again. The opening widened just enough for a person to squeeze between the steel and the concrete wall. Beyond it, I thought I saw another shoreline. Another dock. Another set of lights glowing softly through the darkness. The same impossible place I had glimpsed beyond the fog. I climbed back into the truck before I could change my mind and drove straight for the control building. By the time I returned with the day shift, Emergency Gate 7 was closed again. The warning light had stopped flashing. The control box still had no power. Everything looked exactly as it had for the last 12 years. The others believed it had been another equipment fault. I almost believed them too, until I emptied my pockets. Resting beside my truck keys was a rust-covered bolt nearly the size of my hand. It hadn't come from my truck. It hadn't come from the control room. Stamped into the side were 4 faded words. Gate 7, inner side. I couldn't stop thinking about the bolt. It sat on my desk where I had left it that morning. Rust covered every edge, but the stamped words were still clear enough to read. Gate 7, inner side. Nobody at Lock 14 believed it belonged there. The maintenance supervisor picked it up, turned it over in his hand and shrugged. Probably fell off years ago. It was warm, I said. He smiled the way people smile when they think you're tired. Steel doesn't remember where it came from. Maybe he was right. Maybe I wanted an explanation so badly that I was starting to see one everywhere. But one question refused to leave my mind. If Emergency Gate 7 had no power, who kept opening it? That evening, I skipped dinner and went straight to the records room beneath the control building. The room smelled of old paper and damp concrete. Rows of shelves disappeared into the darkness. Most people avoided this place because nearly everything had been scanned into computers years ago. Almost everything. The oldest maintenance journals were still stored in dusty cardboard boxes. I carried one onto the table and brushed away a thick layer of dust. The cover read, Flood Control Maintenance, 1978. Inside were inspection reports, equipment repairs, and handwritten notes from mechanics who had retired decades ago. Most entries were ordinary. Replace cable. Lubricate gear assembly. Inspect hydraulic lines. Hours passed before I found anything unusual. One mechanic had written only a single sentence across an entire page. Gate opened again before inspection crew arrived. No explanation. No signature. Just that. I turned the page. The next day's report ignored it completely. almost as if the note had never existed. I searched another journal. This one came from 1986. Halfway through the book, another strange entry appeared. Emergency activation. No operator responsible. Again, nothing after it. No investigation. No repair record. No follow-up. It was as though someone wanted the event mentioned, but not discussed. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I pulled more journals from the shelves. Different handwriting. Different workers. The same strange notes. Gate opened without command. Override engaged. Water level normal. No electrical supply. Always short. Always unfinished. Never explained. One journal felt heavier than the others. The cover had no year written on it. Inside, every page had been filled by the same careful handwriting. The first entry stopped me immediately. Rule 1. Never trust the activation logs. I leaned closer. The writer explained that every unexplained opening disappeared from the official computer system within hours. Only handwritten journals kept the records alive. Someone had noticed. Someone had tried to leave a warning. The next pages became stranger. Each unexplained activation happened during thick fog. Every incident occurred after midnight. Every operator reported hearing emergency radio traffic first. My pulse quickened. The pattern matched everything I had experienced. Then I reached the final pages. The handwriting changed. It became shaky, uneven, almost frightened. It opens because something asks to come through. I stared at the sentence. The next page had been torn out. Several pages after that were missing too. Whoever removed them had done it carefully. No scraps remained. Only empty gaps. Something slid across the concrete floor behind me. I looked up. Nothing. The room stood empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else was reading over my shoulder. I gathered the journals and carried them upstairs. Rain had started falling outside. Water tapped softly against the windows. The control room felt strangely comforting after the darkness below. I placed the journal beside the emergency radio. Without warning, the printer started. One page slowly slid into the output tray. Nobody had sent anything. I picked it up. It was a maintenance request. Dated tomorrow. The request described an inspection of emergency, Gate 7. At the bottom appeared a handwritten note. Don't forget the journals this time. Tomorrow's date hadn't arrived yet. I turned the page over. Blank. The radio crackled. Not with static. With paper. It sounded as though someone was turning pages very slowly. Then a quiet voice spoke. You found them. I answered before fear could stop me. Who wrote those journals? A long silence followed. Finally, I did. My throat tightened. Who are you? The reply came almost gently. The last operator who believed them. The transmission ended. I hurried back downstairs. The journal still lay open on the table where I had left it. Except, several pages had turned by themselves. A bookmark I hadn't noticed before rested between two entries. The ink looked darker, newer, as if those pages had been written yesterday. I began reading. The writer described following unexplained gate activations into the fog. He mentioned strange radio calls, impossible river charts, a hidden harbor. Every detail matched my own experiences. Then one sentence made my hands shake. If you're reading this, you're already following my footsteps. I turned another page. There was a rough sketch of the control room. My control room. The desks matched perfectly. The windows. The radios. Everything. One chair had been circled in red. My chair. Below the drawing were 7 words. Never sit there after 2:17. I looked at the wall clock. Its frozen hand still pointed to 2:17. The same broken time I had noticed on my first night. The room suddenly felt much colder. I checked my watch. 1:46 a.m. Half an hour remained. I laughed quietly. The warning was ridiculous. It had to be. Still, I couldn't bring myself to sit down. Instead, I stood by the window watching the river. The rain stopped. Mist slowly drifted across the water. At exactly 2:17, every light inside the control room dimmed. Only for a second. When they returned, my chair had rolled backward nearly 3 feet. Nobody had touched it. The journal lying on the desk was now closed. A fresh page marker stuck out from the middle. I opened it. The new page hadn't been there before. The ink was still wet. The final line had just been written. Thank you for continuing the log. Below it, in handwriting that looked exactly like mine, the next sentence slowly finished itself. Tomorrow night, you'll write what opens the gate. I stepped away from the desk. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. Outside, somewhere beyond the fog, Emergency Gate 7's warning horn sounded once. Long, low, patient, as if it already knew I would come back. I knew the river had changed before I stepped outside. It wasn't the sound. The water was still moving. The pump still hummed in the distance. The warning lights still blinked across the lock. But something felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. I walked to the east window and looked toward the channel. The current had slowed again. That wasn't unusual after heavy rain. What made my stomach tight was a floating branch. It wasn't drifting downstream. It was creeping upstream. At first, I thought the wind had caught it. Then another branch followed. Then a plastic bottle. Then a cluster of dead leaves. Every one of them moved against the current. Slowly, silently, as if the river had forgotten which direction it was supposed to flow. I grabbed my flashlight and hurried outside. The cold air smelled of wet stone and mud. The river looked calm, almost peaceful. If I hadn't watched the branches moving with my own eyes, I might have believed everything was normal. I knelt beside the water and dropped a small stick into the channel. For a second it floated in place. Then it turned. Instead of drifting away from the lock, it glided back toward me. I watched until it disappeared beneath the concrete wall. My radio crackled. You noticed. I didn't jump anymore when the voice spoke. That frightened me more than the voice itself. I was getting used to it. What is happening? I asked. The river remembers. Remembers what? A long pause filled the speaker. The way it flowed before the gate. The transmission ended. I stood there for several seconds, staring at the water. Before the gate. Emergency Gate 7 had always been described as flood protection. Nothing more. But the journals, the hidden harbor, the impossible photographs. Every clue pointed toward something else. Something nobody had wanted recorded. Back inside the control room, I pulled out the oldest engineering maps stored in the archive. Most were faded blueprints from before the modern lock had been built. One drawing caught my attention immediately. The river looked different. Not slightly different. Completely different. The main channel curved nearly half a mile east of its present course. Where Lock 14 now stood, there had once been a large natural basin. The words written across it had been crossed out with thick black ink. I held the page beneath my desk lamp. The original label still showed faintly through the marker. Containment pool. Not reservoir. Not flood basin. Containment. I read the word 3 times before my mind accepted it. Contained what? The official construction notes had been removed. Only torn paper remained. Someone hadn't wanted future operators reading them. Outside, the warning horn sounded. One blast, then another. Not from the lock, from emergency gate 7. I checked the electrical monitor. No power. The gate still couldn't operate. Yet the alarm continued. I drove there without calling anyone. Part of me knew nobody would believe what I had already seen. The road looked different tonight. Small streams crossed the cracked pavement, but they weren't flowing downhill toward the river. They climbed uphill. Water ran against gravity. Tiny rivulets crawled toward gate 7 like living things searching for home. I stopped the truck and watched one stream carefully. It reached a rock. Instead of flowing around it, the water climbed over it. My hands began shaking. I had spent my whole life around rivers. Water didn't behave like this. It couldn't. The radio whispered softly. Neither should the gate. By the time I reached the spillway, fog had settled across the entire valley. The steel gate stood exactly where I had left it. Closed. Silent. I almost felt relieved. Then I noticed fresh water pouring from beneath it. Not much, just enough to form a narrow stream. The strange thing was its direction. The water wasn't flowing away from the river. It was flowing toward the gate. Every drop climbed the concrete slope before slipping underneath the steel. I walked closer. The stream passed over my boots without getting them wet. I looked down. The water simply separated around my feet as though avoiding me. A deep metallic groan echoed through the structure. The gate shivered. Not opening. Breathing. At least that's what it looked like. The movement was slow. Rhythmic. Almost alive. I pressed my hand against the cold steel. This time it wasn't warm. It vibrated gently beneath my palm. A heartbeat. No. Something slower. Larger. As if an enormous machine worked somewhere beyond the wall. Or something much worse. I stepped back. The vibration stopped. The radio spoke again. It knows you're here. What's behind the gate? No answer. Only the sound of moving water. Except the river beside me had become perfectly still. I looked across the channel. Fish floated near the surface. Not dead. Frozen. Every ripple disappeared. Even the wind seemed unable to touch the water. Then, without warning, a single drop rose into the air. It climbed several feet. Another followed. Then another. Soon hundreds of droplets floated upward, like slow-moving rain falling in reverse. Moonlight caught them. The entire river glittered. Beautiful. Impossible. Terrifying. The droplets drifted toward emergency gate 7. Each vanished beneath the steel, as if the gate were swallowing the river one drop at a time. A loud crack echoed behind me. I turned. One of the old concrete support columns had split. A fresh fracture stretched from top to bottom. Water seeped through it. Black water. Not muddy. Not oily. Simply black. It spread across the concrete without reflecting my flashlight. The same strange darkness I had seen beyond the fog line. The radio hissed. Don't touch it. I backed away. Too late. The tip of my boot brushed the edge of the black water. The world blurred. For one heartbeat, I wasn't standing beside the spillway anymore. I stood inside the hidden harbor. The lantern still burned. The abandoned buildings remained silent. Only now. They weren't empty. People stood inside every doorway. Dozens of them. Watching me. Lock operators. Rescue workers. Boat crews. Men and women wearing uniforms from different decades. None of them moved. None of them blinked. They simply stared. Then every head turned toward the same building at the end of the dock. The door slowly opened. Someone stepped into the light. He wore my uniform. He had my face. He looked older, exhausted. He raised one finger to his lips. Then everything vanished. I stumbled backward onto the concrete beside Gate 7. The black water had disappeared. My boot was dry. Only seconds had passed, or so my watch claimed. The crack in the support column remained. Only now it had grown wider. Steel bolts popped free one by one. The gate groaned loudly. Not opening. Struggling. Holding. Suddenly I understood. Every strange journal. Every erased report. Every missing page. The impossible harbor. The voices. None of it had begun because the gate malfunctioned. The gate was doing exactly what it had been built to do. It wasn't opening by accident. It was resisting, keeping something on the other side. Something patient enough to wait for decades. Something that only needed the gate to weaken. As I drove back toward the control building, the river behind me continued flowing uphill. The current ignored every law of nature. The warning horn echoed through the valley again. Longer this time. Almost desperate. When I reached the control room, a fresh message waited on the printer. No sender. No timestamp. Only one sentence. Containment integrity, 93%. I stared at the number. Before I could take another breath, the page printed again. The percentage had changed. Containment integrity, 92%. Nothing else happened. No alarm sounded. No lights flashed. Only the quiet printer feeding out another page every few minutes. Each one showing a smaller number than the last. The first rescue boat never left the dock. That should have been impossible. Our rescue crews checked their equipment before every night shift. They followed the same routine every single time. Engines, radios, fuel lines, navigation lights. They were careful because the river gave people very few second chances. But that night, every rule seemed to stop working. The distress call came just after 11. The radio burst to life with heavy static. Mayday, anyone, we're taking on water. The voice sounded weak. Far away. Somewhere upstream. I leaned closer to the speaker. This is Lock 14. State your position. A few seconds passed. Then the answer came. Mile 21. The same place. Always the same place. I looked at the river through the control room window. Nothing. The water rolled quietly beneath the moonlight. No lights. No boat. No movement. I contacted the county rescue station. Within minutes, they confirmed a launch. For the first time since these strange calls had begun, I felt a little hope. If trained crews searched the area, maybe they would finally find whoever kept calling. I watched the rescue dock through the security cameras. Crew members untied the boat. One operator climbed behind the wheel. The engine started immediately. Then it died. He tried again. The starter turned. Nothing. Another crew member checked the fuel gauge. Full. They opened the engine cover. Steam drifted into the cold night air. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I could tell from their faces that something wasn't right. 5 minutes later, they brought out a second rescue boat. Its engine started. Everyone relaxed. The boat backed away from the dock. Then halfway through the turn, every light on board went dark. The engine stopped. The boat drifted silently back against the pier. No alarms. No smoke. No obvious damage. It simply refused to move. I picked up the radio. County Rescue, what's happening? The dispatcher answered with clear frustration. We don't know, both boats failed. The distressed voice broke through the transmission again. We don't have much time. My hands tightened around the microphone. We're trying to reach you. Hurry. The signal faded beneath static. I checked the weather radar. Clear skies. No storms. No electrical interference. Everything looked normal. Too normal. The county requested help from another station, nearly 30 miles downstream. Their rescue crew launched within 15 minutes. I watched their progress on the tracking screen. The small icon moved steadily toward us. 10 miles away. 8. 6. Then it stopped. I called them immediately. Rescue 3, what's your status? The captain answered between heavy breaths. Lost propulsion. Mechanical failure. A pause. I don't think so. What do you mean? The river. He stopped speaking. Only rushing wind filled the radio. Then he whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. It's pushing us backward. I looked at the river outside. The current still flowed downstream. Calm. Steady. Exactly as it always had. Yet somehow an experienced rescue crew couldn't move against it. A loud metallic sound echoed through the control room. The old wall clock had fallen onto the floor. Its glass shattered. The frozen hand still pointed to 2:17. I hadn't touched it. No vibration had reached the building. I picked it up carefully. Behind the clock, someone had written directly on the wall. The letters looked faded with age. They never arrive in time. My heartbeat quickened. That message hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had. Maybe the clock had hidden it for years. The radio hissed. You found it. I didn't even ask who was speaking anymore. Who wrote that? You did. The answer came without hesitation. I looked back at the wall. The handwriting looked strangely familiar. Not identical. Just familiar enough to make me uncomfortable. Outside, headlights appeared near the access road. A volunteer fire department had arrived with a small, inflatable rescue boat. Their engine wasn't complicated like the larger vessels. Simple, reliable. One of the firefighters smiled as they unloaded it. For a moment, I believed this attempt would succeed. I watched them launch into the river. The inflatable drifted smoothly away from shore. The small outboard motor purred quietly. Then every fish near the boat leaped from the water at once. Dozens of silver flashes filled the air. The crew looked around in confusion. Without warning, the motor stopped. The boat continued drifting. Not downstream. Sideways. Toward the opposite bank. The current ignored every law I understood. The firefighters paddled with all their strength. The boat refused to respond. Within seconds, thick fog rolled across the river. The crew disappeared inside it. I grabbed the radio. Engine 12, report your position. Silence. Again. Nothing. The dispatcher tried every emergency channel. No response. After nearly 10 minutes, the fog lifted. The inflatable floated beside the launch ramp, exactly where it had started. The firefighters climbed out slowly. None of them spoke. One man looked pale. Another refused to meet anyone's eyes. Later, I asked what had happened. He only shook his head. We never left. But I watched you. He swallowed hard. No. We launched. We blinked. And we were back. He wouldn't say another word. Near midnight, I opened the forgotten maintenance journals again. This time I searched for rescue reports instead of gate activations. The pattern appeared almost immediately. Every few years, a distress signal, multiple rescue attempts, mechanical failures, missing crews, then silence. One journal contained a folded newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Search called off after 5th day." The article described a cargo vessel that had vanished without leaving debris. The location matched the same stretch of river. Mile marker 21. Someone had circled one sentence with red pencil. No explanation for repeated equipment failures was ever found. Tucked inside the clipping rested a handwritten note. It delays them until the river is quiet again. No signature, just those words. The control room lights flickered. When they steadied, every security monitor showed the same image. The upstream camera. The fog had returned. A single white navigation light glowed inside it, slowly moving toward the lock. Finally, a boat. I leaned closer. The shape emerged little by little. An old rescue vessel, paint peeling from its sides. The same model that had disappeared years ago. Its engine made no sound. No wake followed behind it. It simply glided across the water. As it reached the edge of the floodlights, I realized something that made my stomach turn. No one stood at the wheel. The cabin was empty. The boat drifted silently past the lock without slowing. Then it entered another patch of fog and vanished. Not faded. Vanished. Every camera lost it at the exact same moment. The emergency radio crackled softly. The tired voice sounded almost sympathetic. They're still trying to reach us. I looked back toward the empty river. If those boats disappeared, I whispered, where did they go? The answer came after a long silence. They're waiting where every rescue is delayed. The transmission ended. Seconds later, the printer beside my desk came to life. A fresh incident report slid into the tray. The timestamp was tomorrow night. The status line contained only 3 words. Rescue attempt 6. I should have walked away after hearing the voice behind that locked door. Instead, I reached for the radio again. Even now, I still ask myself why. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe I believed someone was trapped somewhere upstream. Or maybe curiosity is stronger than fear when you spend enough nights alone. The basement archive was silent. The old radio had stopped talking. Only the cold air drifting from the open room reminded me that something impossible had just happened. I backed out slowly and locked the steel door again. The brass key felt heavier than before. When I returned upstairs, the control room looked exactly as I had left it. The river flowed quietly beyond the windows. The monitors showed empty water. Nothing moved. For a few minutes, I almost believed the nightmare had ended. Then the emergency radio clicked. "Can you hear me now?" The weak voice sounded tired. Not angry. Not threatening. Just desperate. I stared at the microphone. The maintenance journal had warned me never to interrupt the message. It said nothing about answering after it finished. I picked up the handset anyway. "This is Lock 14. The words barely left my mouth before every light inside the control room flashed once. A loud alarm exploded through the building. The emergency floodgate warning. My heart jumped into my throat. I rushed to the control panel. One of the old floodgates had begun opening by itself. That made no sense. The backup motors had been disconnected years ago. The indicator lights confirmed it. No electrical power. No hydraulic pressure. Yet the heavy steel gate continued creeping upward. Outside, gears groaned through the darkness. Metal scraped against metal. The sound echoed across the river. I hit the emergency stop button. Nothing happened. The gate climbed another few inches. Then it stopped on its own. Every alarm fell silent. The control panel reset as if nothing had happened. My breathing slowly returned to normal. I looked at the microphone still lying on the desk. Had my reply triggered the alarm? It couldn't have. There had to be another explanation. I opened the maintenance software. No equipment faults. No motor activity. According to the computer, the floodgate had never moved. I hurried outside with my flashlight. The cold night air hit my face. The gate stood exactly where I had seen it stop. Half open. The computer was lying. Or something had changed the records. Fresh scratches covered the steel rails. Small flakes of rust floated in the water beneath them. The gate had definitely moved. I touched the metal. It was warm. That frightened me more than anything else. Cold steel doesn't become warm in the middle of the night. Not without a reason. The radio clip to my belt crackled. "A thank you." The voice whispered directly into my ear. I nearly dropped the radio into the river. "You answered." Before I could respond, another siren began screaming from inside the control building. Fire alarm. I sprinted back upstairs. Red lights flashed across every hallway. Smoke detectors activated one after another. Yet the air smelled perfectly clean. No smoke. No fire. The control system identified the location. Archive Room B. The room behind the locked steel door. I froze. That room wasn't even connected to the modern alarm system. At least it shouldn't have been. Still, every monitor displayed the same warning. Fire DATSCTD. Archive Room B. I unlocked the basement door again. Cold air rolled into the hallway. No smoke. No flames. Only darkness. The flashlight beam swept across old shelves covered with dusty binders. At the center of the room stood a wooden desk. An ancient radio rested on top. Its speaker glowed with a faint green light. No power cord connected it to anything. Beside the radio sat a notebook. Its first page contained only one sentence. "Every reply makes it worse." As I read the words, the fire alarm stopped. Complete silence filled the room again. I turned another page. Each entry had been written by a different lock operator over several decades. Most were short. I answered once. The floodgate opened. I answered twice. The river changed. I answered 3 times. He learned my name. The final entry ended abruptly. There was no signature. Only a wet handprint stained across the paper. I slowly closed the notebook. The old radio clicked softly. "Please don't stop answering." The desperate voice sounded closer than ever. Almost human. Almost convincing. I reached toward the speaker. Before my fingers touched it, every emergency alarm in the building activated at once. Floodgate, fire, power failure, intruder detection, high water, evacuation. The control room upstairs exploded into flashing lights and warning sirens. The entire lock shook beneath my feet. Somewhere outside, another massive steel gate began opening all by itself. And through the chaos, I heard the caller whisper one sentence that made my blood run cold. Now they're awake. I knew something was wrong before I even touched the water. The river looked calm from the surface, too calm. Most mornings the lock was loud. Pumps rumbled beneath the concrete. Steel cables groaned. Water slapped against the walls. But that morning every sound seemed far away, like someone had wrapped the whole place inside a heavy blanket. I checked my watch. 4:42 a.m. Still dark. The maintenance supervisor handed me the inspection clipboard without looking me in the eyes. Just another routine dive, he said. Routine. People at the lock loved that word. Routine inspections. Routine repairs. Routine equipment failures. It made everything sound normal, even when it wasn't. I pulled on my dry suit beside the maintenance dock while a cold mist drifted over the river. The floodlights reflected off the water, but their light seemed to disappear after only a few feet, almost like something below was swallowing it. I clipped my radio to the harness. Diver ready. My partner, Ellis, answered through static. Copy that. We'll keep eyes on your line. His voice sounded farther away than it should have. I stepped onto the ladder. The metal was wet, ice cold. Each step took me deeper into black water that smelled like mud, rust, and old concrete. Then my helmet slipped beneath the surface. Everything changed. The world above vanished. Only my flashlight remained. Its narrow beam cut through green water filled with drifting particles. Tiny bits of sand floated past my faceplate like snow. My breathing echoed inside my helmet. Slow, steady, too loud. The inspection path followed one of the massive concrete walls supporting the lock. I'd swum it dozens of times. Every crack, every bolt, every steel brace. I knew exactly what should be there, and exactly what shouldn't. At first, everything looked normal. The concrete was stained with algae. Fish scattered whenever my light crossed them. The guide cable remained tight beneath my glove. I relaxed a little. Maybe today really was routine. Then my flashlight reached something impossible. A second wall. I stopped swimming. There wasn't supposed to be another wall behind the first one. But there it was, only a few feet away, covered in thick black silt, older than anything else down there. My pulse began climbing. Surface, do you copy? Only static answered. I tried again. Nothing. The radio had worked seconds earlier. Now all I heard was a low crackling sound that almost reminded me of distant voices. I forced myself forward. The gap between the two walls was barely wide enough for my shoulders. My flashlight revealed carved stone instead of poured concrete. Stone, perfectly smooth. The lock had been built with reinforced concrete. There should have been no stone structures anywhere beneath it. I reached out with one gloved hand. The surface felt strangely warm. Not hot, just warmer than the surrounding water. That made no sense. Cold river water should have cooled everything equally. I wiped away centuries of silt. Lines appeared, not cracks, symbols, long rows of markings carved into the stone. They weren't letters I recognized. Some curved like river currents, Others looked almost like human figures standing shoulder to shoulder. My stomach tightened. Who had built this? And why had nobody ever mentioned it? The current shifted without warning. Not around me, toward the narrow space between the walls. It was subtle at first, then stronger. The water was flowing into the darkness. I looked back toward the guide cable. It floated straight behind me. The river wasn't moving, only the water inside this hidden passage. That shouldn't have been possible. There was no opening on any blueprint, no underground tunnel, no hidden chamber. Yet something beneath the lock was pulling the river inward, very slowly, very steadily, as if it had been doing it for a very long time. Then my flashlight flickered. Just once. When it came back, I noticed footprints. Not in mud, in the thick layer of silt covering the stone floor. Fresh, clear, human footprints, leading deeper into the passage. Not away from it. Someone had walked down here. Impossible. No diver had entered this area before me. At least, that's what I believed. And then, from somewhere beyond the reach of my light, I heard the unmistakable sound of metal scraping against stone. Slow, heavy, getting closer. I knew something was wrong the moment they pulled the dive suit onto the dock. It wasn't torn. It wasn't covered in blood. It looked almost new. The only strange thing was that it was empty. The helmet visor reflected the gray morning sky while river water dripped from the gloves, one drop at a time. Everyone around me stood in complete silence. The maintenance crew, the rescue team, even the lock supervisor. No one wanted to be the first person to explain how an empty suit had climbed out of the water. Just 6 hours earlier, diver Ethan Mercer had gone beneath the spillway for a routine inspection. His lifeline had suddenly gone slack. His radio filled with static, then nothing. We searched until sunrise. We found no body, no helmet, no oxygen tank, only endless dark water. Now his suit was lying on the concrete, as if someone had carefully taken it off. I walked closer. The boots were still wet. Fresh water pooled beneath them. That meant they hadn't drifted here overnight. They had come out of the river only minutes ago. Who found it? I asked. Nobody answered. One of the younger mechanics slowly pointed toward the access ladder leading into the water. It walked from there. His voice cracked before he finished the sentence. I wanted to laugh. Instead, I couldn't stop staring at the muddy footprints. 2 perfect rows. They began at the edge of the river. They ended beside the empty suit. There were no footprints leading away, only toward it. I knelt beside the helmet. Inside the visor was a thin layer of fog. Warm fog, as if someone had been breathing inside only moments before. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. That wasn't possible. The suit had no body in it. I reached for the radio attached to Ethan's chest harness. The battery indicator still flashed green. Somehow it still had power. Static filled the speaker. Then beneath the crackling noise, I heard something else. Voices. More than one. Quiet. Far away. Like people talking underwater. I turned the volume higher. The words were impossible to understand, but I recognized one voice immediately. It was Ethan. He sounded calm. Too calm. Almost relaxed. Don't let them open it. The transmission dissolved into static. Every hair on my arm stood up. Ethan had disappeared hours ago. No rescue diver had reached him. His radio should have been dead. Yet his voice had just spoken to me. I looked toward the spillway. Dark water poured over the concrete wall without stopping, hiding whatever waited beneath the surface. For the first time since I started working at the lock, I wasn't afraid of drowning. I was afraid of what might already be living down there. Then I noticed something tucked inside one of the suit's gloves. A folded piece of waterproof paper. It wasn't there during the first inspection. My hands shook as I unfolded it. There were only 5 words written in thick black marker. It found a way up. No signature. No date. Only a muddy handprint beneath the message. It wasn't a human handprint. There were 6 fingers. The first thing I noticed wasn't the missing files. It was the handwriting. Every operator who had worked this lock before me had signed their shift reports in blue ink. Different names, different years, different handwriting, but every final report ended the same way. Do not answer the third call. No explanation. Just that sentence. I stared at the stack of yellowed folders spread across my desk while rain tapped softly against the control room windows. Tomorrow was my retirement. 41 years on the river, and tonight was supposed to be nothing more than paperwork and memories. Instead, I couldn't stop turning pages. Shift report 148. Normal operations until 2:13 a.m. Then 1 emergency transmission. No vessel found. Shift report 271. Power failure. Unidentified distress call. No source located. Shift report 403. Operator resigned the following morning. Reason not listed. Again and again, decades passed, but the pattern never changed. Every few years, someone reported the same thing. A call for help. Always after midnight. Always from somewhere upstream. Always impossible to locate. My coffee had gone cold before I realized the times were almost identical. 2:13, 2:14, 2:12, 2:13. It wasn't random. Whatever happened almost to the minute. I leaned back in my chair and rubbed my tired eyes. The control room felt strangely quiet. Normally, I could hear pumps humming below the building and water rushing through the lock gates. Tonight, those familiar sounds seemed distant, muted, like the building itself was listening. I opened another folder. This one was older than the rest. The paper felt brittle beneath my fingers. Inside was a hand-drawn map of the river. Someone had circled a section several miles upstream. Next to it were 4 words. It waits beyond here. No signature. No date. Just those words. I frowned. Every official navigation chart showed nothing unusual in that stretch of river. No abandoned structures. No old locks. Nothing. Then why had 3 different operators marked the exact same place over 30 years apart? A burst of static exploded from the radio beside me. I nearly spilled my coffee. The speaker hissed for several seconds before falling silent again. I checked the signal monitor. Nothing. No incoming traffic. No active transmission. Just silence. I reached for the volume knob. Before my hand touched it, the radio crackled again. A weak voice slipped through the static. "Control, please respond." I froze. The voice sounded exhausted, like someone had been speaking for hours. I repeat, this is an emergency. The signal broke apart into harsh static. I grabbed the microphone. River lock control responding. Identify yourself. No answer. Only the steady hiss of an empty channel. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. Nothing. I logged the incident automatically, more from habit than concern. Then I noticed something that made my stomach tight. The clock above the radio read exactly 2:13 a.m., the same time written in every report. I slowly turned toward the shelves holding 40 years of records. For the first time in my career, those old reports didn't feel like history. They felt like warnings. Outside, a dense layer of fog rolled across the river, swallowing the navigation lights one by one. The locked gates disappeared into white silence. Then the radio came alive once more. The same voice. Only this time it whispered my name. I had never told anyone I was working the night shift. The radio started ringing exactly 1 minute before my shift ended. I didn't answer it. For 42 years, I had answered every emergency call that came through this control room. Floods, broken engines, lost fishermen, barges drifting without power. Every voice had belonged to someone who could still be saved. This one was different. It had been calling me every night for the past 11 days. The same weak burst of static. The same distant voice. The same impossible location that did not exist on any river chart. I stared at the clock above the control panel. 5:59 a.m. In 60 seconds, I would officially retire. The next operator would take this chair. The next operator would inherit this radio. And if I was right, the next operator would hear the same voice. The ringing stopped. Silence settled over the lot. Outside, the river drifted beneath a blanket of gray fog. The floodlights reflected off the water, but the light never seemed to travel very far. It simply faded into the mist, as though something out there refused to let it pass. I opened the lowest drawer of my desk. Inside sat a single manila envelope. Across the front, I had written only one sentence. Read this before answering any call after 2:13 a.m. I had rewritten that sentence 3 times before finally sealing the envelope. Every version sounded unbelievable. Because the truth was unbelievable. 42 years ago, on my very first night, the operator training me laughed when I asked about the old emergency reports. He said every lock had ghost stories. He told me to ignore them. Then, just before sunrise, he leaned close enough that I could smell the coffee on his breath. If you ever hear someone asking for lock control from upstream after 2:13, he whispered, pretend the radio is broken. The next morning, he retired. 3 weeks later, he disappeared. No body was ever found. At the time, I believed it was a coincidence. Now I knew better. I reached for the logbook resting beside the microphone. Every unexplained transmission was listed there. Every impossible distress call. Every failed rescue. Every report from crews who searched empty water while insisting they could hear voices beneath their boats. The pattern never changed. Each incident ended with one operator leaving and another taking their place. The radio crackled. Not a ring this time. A voice. Very quiet. You stayed. I froze. No call signal. No identification. Just those 2 words. I picked up the microphone before I could change my mind. This is lock control. Identify yourself. For several seconds, only static answered. Then the voice returned. Older this time. Almost familiar. You already know my name. A cold pressure settled across my chest. I did know it, because it sounded exactly like the man who had trained me 42 years earlier. That was impossible. He had vanished decades ago. You never left, I whispered. A slow breath echoed through the speaker. No. My hands began shaking. What are you? The answer came so softly, I almost missed it. The operator before you. The lights inside the control room flickered. Every monitor briefly filled with heavy static. When the screens cleared, every security camera showed the same image. The empty upstream channel. No boats. No people. Only thick white fog. Then, one by one, dark silhouettes appeared at the water's edge. They weren't moving. They were simply standing there, watching the control tower. There were too many to count. The radio hissed again. They all answered. My mouth went dry. Who? Silence. Then one final sentence. Now it's your turn to leave the warning. The computer terminal suddenly woke by itself. A new shift report opened on the screen. No one touched the keyboard. Letters appeared one at a time. Shift report number 918. Operator transfer complete. Awaiting next operator. I looked toward the sealed envelope inside my desk. For the first time, I understood why every retiring operator had left behind strange notes that no one believed. They weren't trying to explain what lived beyond the fog. They were trying to save the person who would answer the radio after them. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. The day operator had arrived. My replacement. Young. Confident. Exactly like I had been. He smiled as he stepped through the doorway. Morning, he said, quiet night. I looked at the radio. It remained silent. For now. I picked up the envelope and placed it gently beside the microphone. I hope, I said, forcing a tired smile, you never have to open that. He laughed. What is it? I looked once more toward the river, disappearing into the morning fog. A warning, I answered. But you'll only believe it after the radio says your name.